guest today is Miles Kessler. He's the director of the Integral Dojo in Tel Aviv, Israel. Also founder of Aikido Without Borders and organizer of Aikido at the Leading Edge, a new 10-day online Aikido summit coming up May 12th through 21st, which will include a series of talks, presentations, panel discussions, and lots more. There'll be many representatives of the Aikido world participating, including Shihan, Christian Tissier, and more. He'll be talking about that, promoting the event in the second half of the interview coming up. My name is Edgar Ortega. I am a Q student, talking to, listening to, and learning from a variety of personalities in the Aikido world, and I'm sharing them here with you, making my Aikido journey and education lots of fun. If you want to hear my other interviews with members of the Aikido world, ranging from Linda Holliday to Lenny Sly, to give you an idea of the variety there, view my playlist entitled Exploring Aikido at Edgar Ortega channel on YouTube. If you're interested in martial arts, particularly in Aikido and Jiu-Jitsu, please subscribe to Edgar Ortega on YouTube and follow the Edgar Ortega radio show page on Facebook and Instagram. I interviewed Miles Kessler Sensei when he just returned from a seminar in Italy to his home in Israel, and during the interview he's out on his patio for that. So you'll hear some nice bird sounds in the background. It's all quite pleasant. There's some distance between us, of course. I'm calling him from the U.S., so after the first question, the audio is slightly touchy for a few seconds, but it's not too bad, and then goes away after less than a minute. So just a heads up on that. After that, it all sounds good. I was excited to have been contacted by Sensei Kessler to promote the upcoming free online telesummit that we can all sign on and participate in. He's going to give us all the details on that, and he talks a little bit about Aikido before that. He's got great plans for that event, so that's exciting, and that's coming up. He's a brilliant guy. After the interview, let me know what you thought about it. Let me know if you agree or disagree with some of the things he says. And if you have any questions about the summit, you guys can go to his dojo's website, which I'll link in this video. Anyway, let me know what you think of the interview in a comment below. Let's get right to it now. This is my interview with Miles Kessler in Tel Aviv. All right, Miles Kessler is an American Aikido instructor now living in Israel, where he operates the Integral Dojo. He studied Aikido under Saito Sensei in Iwama, and now teaches in seminars around the world. He is currently organizing an ambitious 10-day Aikido telesummit, including a variety of well-known personalities in the world of Aikido. Bob Frager, Christian Tissier, and Linda Holliday, to name just a few. I'll let him give you the longer list as it's still developing, I believe. It sounds like an exciting online event that anyone will be able to access. I'm excited to have him here to talk about it, and he's here to talk with us about that, and we'll talk some Aikido as well, I hope. Miles Kessler Sensei, thank you so much for taking time to speak with me today.
You bet, Edgar. It's great to talk to you, and thanks for the cool work that you're doing.
Well, I'm a Q student, and just consider this part of my research as I talk to different teachers here.
It sounds like a great project.
Yeah. I've watched some of your videos and lessons several times, actually, on YouTube over the past couple of years. That's where I found you at first. And there's one of you I especially enjoy with Kayla Fader Sensei of Aikido of Berkeley. Let's talk Aikido for a little bit. We're about, I think it's about 11 days from the 40th anniversary of Sensei's passing. Where is Aikido today? I don't know if you're aware of that. Sometimes it sneaks up on us. Where is Aikido today compared to 48 years ago?
Wow, that's a question. Okay. Well, that's actually it's a good question. It's kind of one of the reasons I'm doing this telesummit. I can tell you that Aikido. I'll try to answer this in a very general way it's possible. On one hand, Aikido is thriving amazingly. The global Aikido community, I think it's just growing on a year-by-year basis. And I think that not only are the practitioners of Aikido getting better and better, but the teachers of Aikido are also getting better and better. And I see the art evolving. I certainly see the art evolving compared to 10 years, 20 years, 30 years ago, 30-some-odd years ago when I started. So on one hand, I think I see it as a thriving, evolving, living, growing art. On the other hand, I see that there's that in that growth process, there's some very interesting limitations that have to do with, many aspects of the art, but have to do with, some of them have to do with Japanese culture, some of them have to do with hierarchical structure, some of them have to do with no hierarchical structure, some of the limitations have to do with the whole issue of, is Aikido a martial art, or is it a spiritual practice, or is it a personal development? So there are limitations that I think are not fully being addressed in the Aikido world. I think many people are talking about them and struggling with them and working with them while they're having a beer after class, and hanging out socially. But in terms of the Aikido, it's almost like Aikido, from my opinion, needs to become a little bit more self-aware. The art, of course, when I say the art, that means you and me, the Aikido community as a whole. And, we all spend so much time in the dojo working on self-awareness and working on personal development that we're all, we're walking this higher path of development. Well, I think it's also important that we step back sometimes and look at the art and see how the art is developing on a higher path of practice, and see how some of these trajectories of Aikido are dead ends, and how do we work with that, and what's it going to take for Aikido to be sustainable into the future?
Well, what are these dead ends you mentioned?
Well, I'll give you a very, very good example. Aikido comes out of Japanese culture. As you said before, I lived in Japan. I was there for 8 years, and I dove in full on, and I totally embraced the culture, totally embraced the language, and I loved it. And it was really good. For that time in my life, from 26 to 34 when I left, it was like the perfect thing for me to be doing. And yet, you and I, for example, you, Edgar, and me, we're both American. We live in a very postmodern, we come out of a very postmodern culture. I don't know you that well, so I can't speak so much for your background, but, we come out of a very egalitarian culture where independence is highly regarded in American culture, also in European culture, and many Western cultures. And there's this horizontal kind of relationship to things where everybody has their own. Everybody can be their own boss. Everybody can make their own decisions. Everybody even should, from one perspective, be self-responsible. And that, in many ways, comes into conflict with the Japanese culture, which is highly conformist rather than individualistic, and highly hierarchical. So, okay, all cool, all good. There's no reason those two structures, those two cultures should be in conflict with each other. But for example, you'll go to dojos and where everybody hangs out and we're all equals. And let's say suddenly, you have to fall into a hierarchy. So a doctor who might be 50 years old has to kind of bow down to some teenager who's been doing Aikido longer than him. It's just kind of a general. It's just a scenario that I'm creating, but I see many times that there's a lot of cultural confusion about what's happened in the dojos, especially the more conservative dojos and conservative styles of Aikido, who really believe that they have to preserve their teacher's style of Aikido and their teacher's style of technique, and they really give very little freedom for critical reason. There's very little freedom for making your own decisions, and it's the hierarchy is such is that you can never progress beyond the teacher. And as a teacher, I can tell you, most Western teachers are like this. We only hope that our students will outgrow us. Whereas, in the traditional hierarchies, the students never outgrow the teachers. The teacher dies, and then the student moves up the hierarchy. And that's it's a totally cool structure, and a totally cool system. It's great. But, those two systems can be in conflict with each other unless we become more conscious how they actually interact and work together. And I don't see it happening too much. Japan's cool because everybody falls in line in Japan. It's a highly conformist, highly hierarchical society. So it's easy to do it there. And even though, somebody may be kind of higher in the hierarchy that you don't really respect, or they don't deserve to be in that position, that they just kind of moved into that position because they've been there long enough. Okay, fine, whatever. Everybody's doing it, so it's fine. That was my experience. I had no problem with it. I mean, obviously Japan is much more about preservation than innovation. It's a cultural thing. It's well known. That's why the Japanese art are so beautifully preserved. And the technical transmission is like the transition of the form goes from generation to generation. And it's really, really a beautiful a learning system. But here in the West, it's interesting because, there's a whole dialectic. It's really a yin and a yang between preservation and creation. Preservation and creation. These two things are absolutely necessary for evolution to happen. If we're just about preservation, we become dogmatic, we become hierarchical, we tell people what they can and they can't do, and we allow no individuality, no uniqueness. If we're just about creation, on the other hand, then we tend to not have a very clear structure, and it's kind of the Sisyphus and Icarus problem. Icarus was this, in the Greek story, was the young man who got the wings. His father built him wings so he could escape the island of Crete. And his father, who was mature and had kind of understood rules, he told him, don't fly too high. Yeah. You're going to be free, but don't fly too far. So he got intoxicated with his freedom. He didn't follow the rules. He flew too high, and he got burned by the sun. The wings melted. He crashed. He died. Yeah. So that's kind of a cautionary tale of too much freedom or too much creativity, if you can say there's such a thing as too much creativity. On the other hand, Sisyphus was this kind of Greek story of the guy who was condemned to a life of eternity of pushing a boulder up a mountain because he'd done some bad things to the gods, and Zeus finally got pissed off. That was his punishment. So imagine this guy, we've all probably been there, especially if you're a man, where you just work, and you push your project up the mountain towards the peak, only to slide back down and have to move up again and again and again. And from that perspective, you can't see that if you just take one step to the side, the boulder will roll down and you will be free. So one is being too attached to discipline, or in this case, preservation, never change. And the other is being too attached to freedom, never let anybody put any limitations. Where actually the dialectic between those two, the yin and the yang, when you limit something, you actually give it freedom. So by limiting something, we should allow it to be free. When something is free, it still has to pay attention to structures and rules and guidelines.
No, it's really interesting. You recently, now how do you relate that? You recently listened to a couple of my interviews. I think it was with Antonio Paulo and Lenny Sly, whose views, I think it's fair to say, are somewhat controversial in the traditional Aikido world. And you contacted me to be... you wanted to comment a little bit on it. Relate what you were kind of talking about just now to their views right now.
Well, first, it's totally cool what they're doing. And in fact, the fact that they're out there and they're really creating a lot of media, and they have fairly popular YouTube channels. I guess in Lenny's case, it's very popular. And kind of bringing out this more combat effective side of Aikido. There's absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. Everybody can. That's in fact, they're being creative when they're doing it. They're kind of out there, on the leading edge, finding what is interesting for them. So in that sense, there's nothing wrong with doing that. There's nothing wrong with taking Aikido and turning it into some type of a spiritual practice, or some types of movement practice, or some type of leadership development. Everybody's going to take the art and well, not everybody, but everybody's allowed to take the art. If you're not too dogmatic, everybody's allowed to take the art and do with it what they will. It's totally fine, and a total expression of creativity. However, what kind of caught me with Antonio's interview, I felt that both and Tony have it. Well, maybe not. I have to listen to Lenny a little bit more, but I actually felt that he was kind of reducing the art of Aikido to a martial art. There's almost a thing. It's like the two of them seem to be on a mission to regain Aikido's respect in front of the MMA world, which is for me a little bit ridiculous because Aikido is not a combat ring competition art. You know, the whole one of the central injunctions that O-sensei gave us was Masakatsu Agatsu.
Yeah. True
victory is victory over oneself. And yet every single frame of their videos, again, it's totally cool that they're like this, but every single frame of their video says, no, true victory is victory over the other person. Yeah. And we're going to do that with Aikido. We're going to take Aikido back. When actually, I don't think it's taking Aikido back. I don't think it's taking Aikido forward. I think it's taking Aikido. I think it's reducing Aikido to something that it can be. I mean, look, you can take Aikido and reduce it to whatever you want, but you're missing the essence of the art because the spiritual core of Aikido is nothing less than spiritual. You know, the central core of Aikido is Masakatsu Agatsu. True victory is one of the injunctions. True victory is victory over oneself. That's a universal. You know, that harmony. I shouldn't say awase, blending. That's a universal. Centering. That's a universal. These are universal truths, universal principles, universal injunctions that were given to us that we practice with, and then we go into our world and our life and in the dojo and our training, and we see where it's applied and where its limitations are. If there's a limitation in a universal principle, then we really have to kind of examine carefully if the limitation is in the principle itself or if the limitation is in us. Yeah. And, you know, up until now, you know, as far, you know, Masakatsu Agatsu, true victory is victory over oneself. Sure, I get, you know, I have my days. I have good days. I have bad days. I have days where I get into an argument or a spat with somebody, not so much like fights, but certainly not physical fights, but arguments that I just feel justified and completely right to win that fight. But I'm not far away from knowing that actually that's a zero-sum game. And Aikido, you know, is higher than that. Aikido is the only life-affirming martial art that there is. I mean, there's some great martial arts and there's some great masters, and you know, and every martial art is definitely can be a higher path of mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual development. It can be, but that's a very razor thin line to walk that path.
Yeah, I wonder if.
And when we reduce it to, yeah, go ahead.
I was just thinking. I wonder if their videos are maybe just to reach out to a specific audience. They of course have a background in Aikido, lots of training, especially Lenny. So I wonder if they're not necessarily putting aside the philosophical and spiritual side of it, but just making it palatable for the audience that they're trying to reach. Is that? I mean, that could be a thing. I haven't talked to them that much about that, but could that be something that they're just? It's kind of like a bait thing.
A wider audience. I totally recognize that. I mean, if you think of Aikido as a piece of pie, not a piece of pie, a pie. Okay. And you cut that pie into 8 pieces, 12 pieces, 24 pieces. It doesn't matter. One of those slices of the pie, a very delicious, a very great, wonderful slice of that pie is unquestionably martial arts, Budo. Mm-hmm. That's one of the pieces of the pie. But it's not the whole pie. When you reduce the whole pie to one piece, then you lose everything else in there. Now, having interest and focus on one piece of pie is totally cool. It's fine. I mean, I also have focus on pieces of the pie in Aikido that I like. But let's be careful not to reduce it because, again, the core of Aikido is universal. So if the core of Aikido is really kind of transforming conflict, you know, not zero-sum, but win-win. If that's the core of the pie, that means in each piece of the pie, it has to be able to be applied. So if I work on, but if martial arts is, if we say that Aikido has to be a martial art, 100%, it is a martial art, it has to be a martial art. That means that when I get into a fight, great. Physical fight, verbal fight, I can use my Aikido. When I do it in the dojo, that's great. When I go to the street, it's great. In business competition, that's great. But what about when I'm having an argument with my wife? Or what about when my daughter doesn't want to brush her teeth? So do I put the moves on them? You see, so when we say it has to be a martial art, it doesn't apply universally. But when we say it's one of its core principles is conflict resolution, then we take that to every situation in our life and we see if it actually applies. All times, all places, all circumstances. And, the fact is that very few of us, certainly in Aikido, face real confrontations in our life. If you're into, again, you look for a fight will find you. But most people doing Aikido aren't really kind of looking for that.
Yeah, and I guess you're talking about a life encompassing martial art, not just necessarily the physical stuff. I interviewed one of my teachers, John Smart, and he was a student of Hikitsuji. Right. He was a student of Hikitsuji Sensei, and in the interview he talked about an Aikido that changes you. I've also heard you speak of Aikido changing the practitioner, not just by increasing in technical skill, but an internal change that occurs in the Aikidoka as they evolve. Talk to me about that.
Okay, so Aikido is the path of harmonizing with universal energy, or however you want to translate it. But one thing's for sure, that, however you translate it, always comes down to the same thing. Do is a path or a way. And, so we have to ask, we really need to kind of understand and ask ourselves, what does that mean? What is a path? A path is nothing less than a higher path of physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual discipline. Higher than what? Higher than the lower instincts, higher than the lower needs, higher than the lower desires of the self, of the ego. So what that means is, as we take a step, as we walk on the path, and the first step on any path, higher path of practice, whether it's Aikido or tea ceremony or meditation or relationships, we really take this kind of universal path that's going to lead us to some liberation. The first step on that path is always a step of awareness. And sooner or later, as we kind of, carry that awareness as the central core of our practice, and sooner or later, as we walk on that higher path of practice, the lower parts of the self are going to be, sooner or later, are going to be challenged. Probably sooner than later, they're going to be challenged. So cool. Now I can let's say, as a guy, this is kind of a man's issue. Some women as well, not all men for sure. But not to the competition thing, not to let anybody else beat me. So let's say that that's one of my kind of core basic instincts that is biologically conditioned for hundreds of thousands of years. And boom, it's right there in my genetic makeup, and that's who I am. So if I do judo or even jujitsu or sports or business or whatever, that I can take that all the way, and I can become a master. But still, by sharpening my competition and beating everybody else. And that can even be an okay thing. I'm not saying it's a dirty, people can do bad with that, but you can also do very good with that. I did a lot of competitive sports growing up. But when I'm doing Aikido, if I carry that with me, then my Aikido is always going to have a zero-sum smell, fragrance to it, rather than a win-win fragrance to it. So that part of me, that instinctual, biologically hardwired part of me is going to be challenged as I continue to do my Aikido practice, as I grow, as I evolve, as I go through the Q ranks, as I get to Shodan. Hopefully by Shodan, if somebody's doing their Shodan test and they're smashing and bashing all the ukes, and then something's, there's good, clean throws, and there's good, clean techniques, and that's not what I'm talking about. Yeah. I'm talking, a little bit more of the aggressive, a little bit more on the zero-sum side of things. Then, sure, technically they might be up at a certain level, but in terms of their personal development, they haven't quite matured yet. So the art itself will actually, and this is where I agree with your teacher, John, is that the art of the self, every time we step on the mat, we're confronted with these lower aspects of the self. And we may directly take them on or may not directly take them on, but we confront them and we reconfront them again and again and again and again and again. And if you do value awareness, or if your dojo, which most dojos are, have a certain amount of awareness in the center of the context, then these so-called basic instincts of who we are will gradually become purified and gradually become worked through and gradually will kind of evolve and mature as we walk along the path. And Aikido certainly has that effect on most people who practice.
Do you think it chips away, or do you think Aikido chips away at those lower forms of ourselves, or do you think it just kind of subdues it? Is it ever appropriate?
Well, I mean, it's probably a combination of both. But remember, subduing the self. Again, we got to be careful here, because now it sounds like we're really in conflict with ourselves, which many times we are. So we got to be careful about how we kind of work with ourselves. We don't want to work with ourselves where myself is the enemy. So let's say, because then I'm just kind of repressing and suppressing and I'm subduing. But yeah, sure, a certain amount of the lower instincts do need to be worked with. And whether it's chipped away or subdued or whatever word we want to use, if it's, again, the higher path of practice kind of the process purifies. And what that means is those lower basic instincts will gradually begin to become uprooted and purified and removed from the system in one way or another. It's a regular challenge, yeah. And what's his name? Roy Dean said something really cool, because I was listening to your interview with him last night, and he said at a certain point, if somebody really wants to get good in Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, they got to commit for a period of time. They've got to be a fanatic about it.
Be obsessed, yeah.
So obsessed, exactly. Well, it's the same thing with personal development, and that's what's so great about martial arts generally. Is that, they do teach us discipline, and they do give us that opportunity to become obsessed about perfecting our art. Now, at a certain point, that has to become internalized. Obsessed, again, is a bit of a strong word, but we could use another strong word like relentless. But, commitment to higher development does require an investment of time and energy. Why? Because for 20, 30, 40 years, whatever, our ego has already been investing itself for our whole life, if not several lifetimes. Now, that's the bad news. It's a lot to overcome. But the good news is it won't take our whole life or several lifetimes to overcome it. It doesn't take that long, but it does take a certain amount of focused attention and work, commitment to some type of inner development and inner work. And doing that while at the same time of perfecting an external art is awesome. Take an art like Aikido, which already has it at the core, is that true victory is overcoming yourself, not overcoming others. That even kind of multiplies the impact of personal development. Much more than if you were doing CrossFit or something like that.
Right. No, it's a lifelong thing, a lifelong mission of development. It's really interesting how Aikido does that, or seems to, as I'm learning, brings that out in everybody. Mm-hmm. We talked, I want to segue a bit into your project here. We talked about where Aikido began a little bit and where you feel it is now compared to before, and some of the differences in Aikido mindsets worldwide and in present day. Where do you see Aikido in another 50 years? I don't know, just kind of drop that on you.
Wow, that's an interesting question. Well, I mean, some of the best Aikido, because I lived in Japan for 8 years, and some of the best Aikido I ever saw in my life was in Japan. Mm-hmm. And, I lived in Japan for 8 years, and some of the worst Aikido I ever saw in my life was in Japan. So, just to kind of, not to bust the myth that all the Aikido in Japan is great, but certainly, technically speaking, really, it's that some of the best is there, if not most of the best. There's a lot of really awesome, amazing teachers that are just like training. There's the whole culture supports it, and they're really getting technically amazing. I see the art kind of technically still kind of progressing that way, but I really, I mean, Aikido is going to continue to grow. It will continue to grow. I would hope that the art would also grow spiritually. I think O-sensei was kind of a visionary, and he was way ahead of his time, several generations, if not lifetimes ahead of his time, and that we're all kind of working towards that. His spiritual realization, came through his Aikido. He didn't become enlightened from Aikido. He was doing all kinds of spiritual practice. He also was deeply into Budo, and he had his enlightenment experience. And then Aikido was an expression of that. Now we're all kind of doing Aikido, repeating Aikido, kind of following the path that he laid down, a path that's continuously evolving and changing. And I do believe that, in the core, encoded into the art, is the spiritual core. And I do see that more and more people are moving towards that spiritual core, towards this kind of non-dual realization. And that was the core of O-sensei's awakening. And Aikido was an expression of that. Non-duality means there's no separation, that you and I are, on the most fundamental, natural level, we're actually not separate, we're connected. And somehow his realization was so deep into that his art affirmed that again and again and again. So now the problem with Aikido today is not everybody's interested in that, and that's fine. If you look at people who are doing really serious spiritual practice, it's always a minority. It's always a small percent, even in religions. Maybe 2% of everybody in a religion are the mystics. It's a small group of people. They're the ones that are going deep. Everybody else is there for security, for, that's their cultural context. Sure. They feel at home. They feel held. It gives meaning to their life and meaning to their place in the cosmos. Whereas the mystic is always trying to kind of, penetrate to the core of the cosmos. O-sensei was clearly that, and then he kind of, birthed this art of Aikido. So it's hard for me to answer your question directly, but what I would hope, and I see Aikido is one of the limitations. I believe Aikido is that the spiritual core has been marginalized. Number one. Number two is that there's very little recognition of vertical development, adult human development, which means that we evolve through stages or not, as the case usually is. But human development can evolve through stages, which basically means perspective. You have the traditional worldview, and we all know what traditional Aikido is. We have a modern worldview. We all know what modern Aikido is, and for my opinion, that's kind of what Lenny and Antonio are doing. It's kind of, you go out there, you achieve, and you compete, and you kind of find your place in the world, and it's a worldview that says, I'm good, and you're not. That's kind of the subtext of it. And certainly Lenny, he's ready to prove that anytime. But that's kind of what happens in the modern world. And then you have postmodern Aikido, which is a push off from that limitation, because that worldview is good. You can become excellent. And Lenny's excellent. He's good at what he does. Yeah. He's not a flake. He's super serious about his practice. Yeah. And he's full. The dude is like totally committed, and he's good. But there's a limitation to it in the sense that, someday he's going to get old, and someday he's going to get weaker physically. He's just going to lose his physical power, and what's left underneath it. And again, this is not a critique of Lenny specifically, but this is kind of a man's issue that, is our power, is our identity based on our physical power, or is it based on something deeper? And this is kind of the limitations of the modern world, because it's very materialistic. Postmodernism comes along and tries to kind of correct that limitation by shifting their focus not on the exterior world, the material world, but on the interior world. Everything becomes very subjective, how I feel, how I want to do this, and there's a lot of feeling stuff going on there. Now, those seem to be quite opposite worldviews, and they're in competition with each other. But if you can stand back, you'll see that these are developmental views, that we moved from traditional into modern, that we moved from modern into postmodern, and that traditional, modern, and postmodern are in conflict with themselves. that those worldviews are constantly talking across each other and very rarely meeting in agreement. And that an emerging worldview that I feel is emerging, this kind of integral worldview, it's postmodern, starts to bring everything together where we can actually sit in the same space and have the same conversation and agree. Traditional Aikido, I love it. I did it for years in Japan. Is it limited? Hell yes, it's limited. But I still love it, but I don't want to do it the rest of my life. Modern Aikido, cool. I did sports as a kid, as a young man. I love competition. I love being excellent. I love achieving. But is it limited? Sure, it's limited. I don't want to do that the rest of my life. I don't want to only live a life like that. Postmodern, yeah, let's sit around and have, drum circles and sharing circles and talk about our feelings and really kind of, especially men, these macho men. Really, you're macho? Now tell me how you feel. Tell me how hard it is with your woman. Tell me where, let's start sharing what's real here. And in a way that we become soft in our heart and we start to kind of, be gentle with each other. For a man to do that, it's not such an easy thing.
No.
But it's a big step to be able to move into that. It's a big and beautiful step. And then the emerging paradigm would be something that kind of embraces all of that. And I would hope that in 50 years that more of the culture is there. Because right now I see it's really, we're talking about, I see, if we just talk about traditional, modern, and postmodern, I see, and I've never done an assessment, so it's just generally speaking, I'm kind of out there in the world doing Aikido quite a bit. I would guess that, 30% of the world is in this kind of traditional stage. Another 30% is in this modern stage, and maybe 20% is in the postmodern stage. The Aikido world, and I know that only adds up to it only adds up to 90. So there's 10% is a bit too generous to say for this emerging paradigm. But I guess about 5% of the world is kind of the Aikido world that I'm in is kind of looking for a way that it all comes together. That we respect the tradition. That in a modern sense, we can be technically excellent and achieve our ranks. And in a postmodern way, we can drop and sit in a circle. There's no hierarchies. We're all equal. We can share our feelings, and we can start to kind of move to the inside of the art with connection. And it's not about proficiency, but just about growth. And it all comes together. So I would hope in 50 years that Aikido is kind of emerges into that, or certainly that we go from 2% to 5% of the population to 10% of the population to 20%. If you hit 10 or 20%, just like in the 60s in the West, there was a critical mass that exploded, and we had the hippie generation transformed culture. Oh, and it seemed like it transformed culture overnight, but it actually happened. And I think that we have another cultural transformation coming down the pipe.
Well, that's really interesting. Gives me a lot to think about, and anybody listening. So now you're organizing a big event. It's a 10-day telesummit called Aikido at the Leading Edge. Give us an idea of what's going to be happening with that. Give us an overview of what it is.
Well, this is kind of a vision I've had for about 4 years now. I'm finally actually getting to the point where me and some friends of mine can actually put it together. And thanks to, the power of technology, the internet, and, the kind of the interconnected world. And I feel that there's a lot of beauty and wisdom and goodwill in the Aikido world that isn't met just because we're spread out all over the world. But the whole idea is, I've always had these really great experiences of coming together with bigger events and like conferences and Aikido seminars and gatherings. But usually, I'd have to get on a plane, travel across the world, or people get on a plane, travel over here, and we do these amazing events. And they're just, it's a combination of enrichment, of beauty, a big love fest, and going away really feeling like you've gotten something, you've taken it with you, and it's going to impact your life. But we always need to be in physical proximity to do that. And for the past 4 years on the Integral Dojo, I've been kind of shifting, doing a lot of online training as well, and a lot of online webinars and workshops. And I've come to find that, it's a really powerful medium for us to get together in ways that we couldn't get together before. So the whole vision behind this telesummit is to get some of the most interesting and exciting teachers around the world to come together for a 10-day period, all online, to share their views, to share their wisdom, and not just the teachers, but also participants, where you get to sign in and you get to kind of get access to the conference. You can join the calls. You can get on the video call together. It's going to be. I'll probably do two sessions a day. We'll have to figure out the time zones because it is global. Some of them will be morning for some people, some parts of the world. Others will be evening for other parts of the world. Maybe even the middle of the night because it is a big world. And we'll get together 2 or 3 times a day, and it'll be a combination of interviews that I do with teachers or interested people who are somehow thought leaders in the Aikido world. We'll also do workshops where they'll lead a workshop. We'll also do panel discussions where, they get on some type of panel. I'll get 4 or 5 people on a panel, and we'll discuss things like, is Aikido a martial art, for example, one topic. And also keynote addresses where the teacher will just get on and give somehow a presentation of their view of the Aikido, their view of Aikido that they want to present to the world. And it's all free. You just have to go to the registration page and put in your email address, and then you will get all the notifications about all the events. And throughout the duration of the telesummit, you'll get access to all of the material that's being offered, and you can download it, keep it for your archives, and it's just a great way to bring a lot of wisdom together that can benefit not just your Aikido, but even your dojo, your community, and the art itself.
Yeah, you mentioned bringing wisdom together. I mentioned a few names. I said 3 of them. Are there any names you can drop right now? I know you're still having the list grow for you.
Yeah, actually, let me pull up my list. And there's a few hanging out there that I would love to say, but I'm going to hold off on them for just a second because. But Christian Tissier has agreed to join the telesummit.
Wow. Yeah.
Who's quite a big name. My good friend and teaching buddy Patrick Cassidy, also Vince Salvatore, Robert Frager Sensei, who is an original student of O Sensei, is going to be with us. Roy Dean agreed to be with us. Roy Dean's, just a showdown in Aikido, but he's quite advanced in Jiu-Jitsu, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and he's got some great views on the art of Aikido as well. Yeah. Josh Gold from LA, he's kind of taking over the reins at Aiki Extensions. He's agreed to be with us. Lawrence Barish, Koichi Barish, he's a reverend. He's a Shinto priest who is American living in Oregon. He's going to be with us. And Linda Holiday Sensei, Susan Chandler Sensei, she's from Key Society. She's in Denver, Colorado. Dave Goldberg out of San Diego. Mark Walsh, who is an Aikidoka, not a teacher, but he's an embodiment teacher. He's one of the top guys in the world teaching embodiment. Paul Linden Sensei is going to join us. Richard Strozzi Heckler. I'm still waiting to get the final okay. In the past, Richard's actually told me he would love to be part of it, but I'm still waiting to hear the final. So, but hopefully he'll be there with us.
You're naming maybes.
Rokas. What's that? Yeah, we'll put a maybe on that one. Hopefully, by the time you're listening to this, he's a yes. Anyways, Rokas Leon, he's another guy that's having an impact with Aikido and media. He's not such an advanced rank, but he's certainly dedicated to the art, and he's putting out weekly Aikido videos on YouTube, and he has a very popular channel. Robert Kent from Aiki Extensions. He's the president of Aiki Extensions. He's going to be joining. Corky Quakenbush, Linda Palmer, and then again, I can't quite say their names yet, but quite a few European friends who are teachers, both men and women, that have in the past told me they would love to be part of it, but I'm just waiting to hear back from them right now. So
yeah, it sounds really exciting for sure. Where are people going to be able to go? I mean, this isn't something on YouTube, but where are they going to be able to go to register and be able to watch all these events?
Well, I mean, the platform we're using is Kajabi, which is connected to our Integral Dojo site. So the best thing to do is just go to the integraldojo.com, and as you land there, you'll see the banner ad for Aikido at the Leading Edge Telesummit. So just click that, and you'll be able to register right away for the conference.
Oh, good. I'll put a link on that on this video, so people can just click there and find it easily. What are the dates? I don't think we mentioned them.
Yeah, it's going to start on May 12th and go until May 21st. So it's 10 days.
So 10 days of Shihan instructors, Aikido wisdom.
Yeah, well, 10 days we got Shihans, we've got Aikido senseis, we've also got Aikido entrepreneurs, thought leaders. So not everybody's exactly will even be teaching Aikido in a dojo, but they've dedicated their life to Aikido. So there's going to be workshops on Aikido and embodiment and leadership and piecework and Aikido in media. Very similar to what you're doing. Not to mention, interesting conversations like is Aikido a martial art? What's the future of Aikido and things like that.
Well, it sounds really exciting. I expect to be a part of it, at least participating and watching. Miles Kessler Sensei, thanks so much for telling us about it and talking with me here about Aikido today. I really appreciate it. It's great to talk with you.
Yeah, Edgar, thank you for having me, and I appreciate you giving me a little space on your platform to spread the word about the event. Thank you, and thanks for the great work you're doing. I wish you the best and hope you keep it up.
No, I look forward to it. It's all part of kind of my learning process here. I appreciate you being part of it too. It's been great talking with you. All right, Aikido at the Leading Edge, the free online 10-day telesummit, begins May 12th and goes through May 21st. So be sure to watch for that. Visit the Integral Dojo. That's the website where you can find more info on that. That's theintegraldojo.com, where you can go and find info on that. Big thanks to Miles Kessler Sensei for coming on the show to promote the event and talk about Aikido with me. He's a brilliant guy. Let me know what you thought about the interview. Do you agree? Do you disagree with anything he said? Leave a comment below. Also, please hit the thumbs up button if you want to see more interviews like this one. Please share these videos and subscribe to Edgar Ortega on YouTube. My name is Edgar Ortega, and you've been listening to the Edgar Ortega Radio Show.